show up at an office and there would be a gate, and they would go through and it would turn chapter 7 or chapter 13.
Well, no, basically there wouldn't be any chapter 13 type
there was
types
some,
of relief.
there was some relief there, but it was very limited.
Not much.
And she was also in the camp that was promoting BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, expenses as well, wasn't she?
I don't
I
recall
don't know.
that specifically.
Very possible.
But while Professor Warren clearly had a desire to help consumers as her stated goal,
Sure.
her approach didn't look as protective as what the direction that those of us at NACBA thought the consumer law should go in. So for the 2 years that the commission was in place, 2.5 years roughly, there was a series of meetings, usually every other month. NACBA had representatives at every one of those. I was at almost every one of those during that time. Norma was at many. Other NACBA people from around the country played important roles because these meetings would focus on different aspects of bankruptcy. There'd be a meeting talking about exemptions, a meeting talking about dischargeability, a meeting talking about refilings, what's an abuse of refiling. And they had different specialty topics set up. Amongst our colleagues, in addition to us, Henry Summer testified periodically, Matthew Mason, Billy Brewer from Raleigh, North Carolina, later became one of our presidents. By the way, Henry Summer became the president after Matt Mason. We had Jean Ryan, that's Jean Ryan, a woman who we've gotten to know and joined NACBA, from Miami, Florida. So we had very talented lawyers and experienced lawyers from many regions of the country that could come in and speak at different panels on different topics. In the tax area, we had from Las Vegas, Nevada, Mark Siegel, and it's I think it's
Segal.
A really terrific advocate for debtors and also very knowledgeable about tax law. And Mark has gone on and he's given a tax program at almost every one of our conventions to educate members of the bar on the latest on that. Mark was focused on that area for us. So we had people involved in these different programs, and we would come, and at each one I think we had our views, and they weren't all uniform. I mean, Norma and I might agree or disagree on something, but when we get 5 of us, there were different approaches.
We all vetted everything through. It was all consistent.
And we would reach a consensus on what direction we thought we should be advocating. We had some judges go, and while they weren't there at NACBA's behest, they they testified in a manner which supported many of the things that we did. I know Judge Morgan showed up at a hearing in early 1997 when they were talking about the various discharge rules, and she spoke very forcefully on the effectiveness of Chapter 13 as it was then constituted in getting tax debts paid and yet getting people a fresh start. And student loans were coming up. By then they had been curbed largely. And so she spoke there.
The discharge had been curbed largely.
The discharge had been curbed.
There was no curbing student loans, that's for sure.
That's
unfortunately.
true. Barely got off the ground.
June of 97 was the last working meeting before they held the final vote in August.
And just as an overall observation, how did you feel as though the commission worked well as a group together?
No, I think
and how did Edith Jones and Elizabeth Warren get along?
How did
Edith Jones and Elizabeth Warren?
Well, you probably could ask either one of them and get a quick answer.
Okay, I'm going to tell a little story about that in a minute, but I like Brady as a person. He's a very nice guy, but he was not a leader from the standpoint of being able to. It was like herding cats, no question about it. But he wasn't as forceful a leader as the commission really needed. So things tended to get pretty chaotic sometimes.
I think we felt that within the commission, many of the commissioners were very generous in giving us time to speak to them,
Yeah.
both during conferences and all the time in between. These conferences would be over a weekend, and you might go to dinner and be talking or at breakfast. So there were a lot of other opportunities. The commission had some really good people on it. I'll say Judge Bob Ginsburg.
Yeah.
He was great because he brought all the experience as a bankruptcy judge there and knew that a lot of the proposals that the credit industry...
Also a former professor.
Mm.
I didn't know that.
Okay.
Yes.
A lot of the proposals that the credit industry was advocating, major changes to the bankruptcy law. I think Judge Ginsburg represented the thinking of many, if not most, judges in the country, that they were overshooting the mark. There had been some abuses that had shown up since '78 from the code, and there were probably 6 or 7 things that could have been fixed, and the abuse would have been dealt with, rather than taking a cannon to fix a problem that you could use a fly swatter for.
So in terms of the
He
other
understood
good,
that.
the other good members, Babette, what was her last
Babette
name?
Sakati,
Oh,
she
yeah.
was on the consumer working
Yeah,
group.
yeah.
Represented labor unions.
Labor,
Yes.
yeah. Mhm.
But not a consumer, she
Right.
didn't have any
Right.
background in her.
Right.
Jay Alex, who was a turnaround specialist,
Right.
again, a
Yeah.
guy without a consumer background.
Right.
Surprisingly, maybe not surprisingly, Caldwell Butler.
Yes. Yes.
Caldwell Butler had been
Former congressman from Virginia.
member of the Judiciary Committee, and actually we found, in talking to Don Edwards, Caldwell Butler had worked closely with Don Edwards during the years they were developing the '78 code.
Mhm.
And at that time, bankruptcy was much more of a bipartisan issue. It wasn't looked at in the manner it seems to have evolved to. And they worked closely together, and it was an interesting partnership there, because
Yeah.
Don Edwards was maybe one of the most liberal congressmen in America. Caldwell Butler, very conservative Republican from Roanoke, and Don, the opposite on the Democrat side. But they got along well before. Don Edwards counseled me when we told him, Don retired in '94, but we used to still see Don. And he counseled me that when we work with the commission, that Caldwell Butler, he says, he's a good man. He says, you can talk to him, he'll listen to you.
And he did.
And he absolutely did. So we found that we got a fair hearing from many of these people. There were some on there that were absolute frights. Norma, one of the commissioners appointed by Chuck Grassley, the way the commission appointments worked was this. When the '94 amendment passed, it gave different appointed powers to different members of the national leadership. The president would get to appoint 3 commissioners. The Chief Justice would get to appoint 2. And the leaders of the House and Senate, Democrats and Republicans, each got 1. So there were congressional appointees, the judicial branch, and the executive branch. And Senator Grassley was given the ability to designate the Senate Republican appointee, and they picked a fellow named Jim Shepard, who lived in Fresno. So Norma and I, as was our one, drove down to Fresno to meet with Jim Shepard and introduce ourselves before the first meeting. He was a very pleasant guy. He had us in the kitchen. We sat down and we explained who we were, and we were looking forward to working with him. And what we found over the next year and a half was he had some very unusual ideas about taxes and bankruptcy. And he was given a lot of leg room within the commission to set up his own panels, which we found to be overwhelmingly weighted against basically business entities and consumers in bankruptcy. It got so bad that they had a meeting in Santa Fe in September of '96. They had 15 people up there, and 13 of them were on the wrong side of what we thought the issues were. And after that meeting, Norma and I took Brady Williamson aside. I remember at breakfast, it was, Brady, this is not right. This isn't a fair-minded thing. You have to do something different, or we'll come out publicly and say this is totally imbalanced. In January, Brady
So he did.
set up a new group of tax experts that were well-rounded. Professor Jack Williams from Georgia.
Yeah, he's a good guy.
Mark Siegel was on there. He had representatives of the IRS, state agencies. It certainly wasn't a debtor-dominated group.
Right.
But
But
it
we had more
balance,
representation.
and it had people that were reflective of
Do you have any
entire
idea
group.
how Grassley ever came up with this guy from Fresno, Jim Shepard?
I don't know whether he had been worked for him at some point. I'm not sure.
don't know.
I
I
don't
don't
know,
know.
but it was.
Just an aside.
He was one that we
As
never.
a side comment, Shepard had his own issues with the IRS.
Well, he wasn't someone that we ever really felt we had a fair hearing from. Edith Jones would be very pleasant when Norma and I
Yeah,
would
he was.
talk to her
She never attacked
individually.
us individually at all.
And for a
We have to
long
give her
time,
credit
what
for that.
happened was Professor Warren had her proposal for bankruptcy, which she was pushing forward within that group, and I think there was a sense that she was going to get that group, including Judge Jones, to buy into it. By early '97, it was apparent that Judge Jones was leading a group within the commission to oppose virtually everything that Professor Warren and the other commissioners were putting together in their package, whether it be in business bankruptcy, consumer bankruptcy, didn't matter. And in fact, Judge Jones, at the various meetings that I went to, was very comfortable, either before or after the meetings, convening a posse of credit industry representatives that looked like, effectively, she was giving them their marching orders. And she had a strong view from what she believed, and she wasn't shy about expressing it.
And so at that point, I guess was it apparent to you at that point that there was something else going on sub rosa with the credited community
Yes.
that wasn't happening in the halls of the commission? If you will?
Absolutely. By January of '97, there was an important meeting, I call it an important meeting, that the American Bankruptcy Institute convened. And they could see that
And who was the head of the American Bankruptcy Institute at that time?
I don't know, Sam Giordano
Sam
was
Giordano.
running.
Sam
Do you
Giordano.
remember who Sam Giordano worked for at one time?
Yeah, wasn't it Grassley?
Charles Grassley.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Well, Sam Giordano convened this meeting, and he thought that they could bring all of the parties together in a big convocation in Alexandria, Virginia, in the middle of winter. And he invited a number of NACBA members to come, he invited me, and
So this was January of '97. I just
Yes.
took over as president of NACBA at that point.
many of us went, invited a number of law professors, and they wanted the law professors to act as moderators within working groups. And there were like 50-some people there. Almost every credit industry representative that had been active at the commission level was there. Some judges were there, but primarily it was debtors, debtor representatives, creditor representatives, mediators, trustees. And at that meeting, the credit industry representative, I think Professor Warren was there,
Oh yeah, she was definitely there.
and Phil Corwin, who was the lead lobbyist for the American Bankers Association in Washington at that meeting, took to the floor of one of the general plenary sessions and denounced Professor Warren's views that he had heard of, and made the statement.
The one chapter
Yeah,
solution.
and he said, "We're going to nuke this."
No. He
That
didn't
was
say
later.
it. He didn't say that. He said that to the commission
Oh,
report.
he sent it to the report. We're going to
Yeah,
nuke this.
we'll get to that.
But they had already come out four square opposed, and I think from that point on, it
The
was-
strange thing is, that was probably the only time that we agreed with the credit industry, because we were opposed to the one chapter version also.
So, just to give flavor, Norma helped me. I wrote, when I was still president, like a 7 or 8 page letter to the commission, primarily aimed at Professor Warren, explaining why this one chapter was going to eliminate so many protections that Chapter 13 gave people.
Right.
Ability to fall behind on a mortgage and then cure it. They had like, you missed, you're done, you lost your
Yeah,
house.
no
Just to
ability
give
to
you an
cure
example.
arrears.
And we tried to put it out in really case examples. This is what it means in the trenches if you do this. So there was probably a little bit of a falling out between us
and her.
Professor Warren, which didn't last long.
It didn't last long, no.
And by August of that year, when they had the final showdown in Washington, and everybody, there were probably a couple hundred people, everybody who'd ever been at a commission hearing. And by a 5-4 vote, they adopted a majority report, which basically adopted almost everything that NACBA, along with many other people, said.
Right.
Fix this problem, and this is how you fix it. And the minority voted no. And the minority included several Democratic appointees. It included a fellow named John Goes, who Tom Foley, in his last act as the outgoing speaker, he had just been defeated, appointed Mr. Goes. And Jeffrey Hartley was appointed by Senator Heflin. And they were in the camp. Caldwell Butler, on the other hand, sided with all of President Clinton's appointees and Judge Ginsburg, who Rehnquist had appointed.
Right.
So that's how that commission. And basically, they had a 1,200-page report. It had really great information, and nobody in Congress ever read it.
So let me say that there were a few meetings right in the summer of '97 that led up to that. And I'll just make a point. There were very few, I had no women mentors, okay? Never did. I didn't expect to, because there weren't many women that were in business at all, and certainly not in bankruptcy business. But in any case, it was kind of funny because there was one of those meetings that summer where Elizabeth Warren, Karen Gross, a professor from New York University at the time that was leading a discussion regarding credit counseling, the debtor education kind of stuff. Anyway, Karen and Elizabeth and I wound up in the bathroom. And we looked at each other and said, hey, there's enough of us. We can have a conversation in the bathroom. But then we looked and there was somebody in a stall. Because that was Edith Jones.
Yeah. That is a good story.
That was funny.
So, my recollection, and you correct me if you think I'm wrong, but my recollection is that the commission report got released about the day after the National Conference of Bankruptcy Judges, their conference in Philadelphia ended. It was in October, late October. The commission had all done a presentation, of which I was moderator, to present their reports. But the next day, the commission issued its report, and it wasn't more than maybe a day or a week later than the first bankruptcy bill.
I think it was before.
I think it preceded it.
It preceded it.
There was a congressman from Florida named Bill McCollum.
And so it would have been
a couple weeks before.
Yeah.
That was the other point I wanted to make, is that's, so when
So before the commission's report ever came out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And that's the nuking part of it. When the commission passed the report, Phil Corwin, I don't know, I just remember him saying, we're gonna nuke that. Okay? And I date from that very point, and Elizabeth Warren knew he said it, to where she is right now, is because of what happened as a result of him saying, I'm going to nuke that report.
That is what you think motivated her to get to the position that she now is in.
Well, she had been, earlier than that, she had written about the causes of consumer bankruptcy and tried to basically humanize it.
Right.
But this made it a little bit more personal.
So what did NACBA do once it learned of the legislation being dropped in Congress?
Well, we were in a desperate way. Our organization, we didn't have a PAC. We didn't have any lobbyists in Washington.
Right.
Over the first 4 or 5 years, we did our business by having Suzanne Bingham set up treks. We would go a couple times a year, and we would meet with people.
You had no lobbying money.
And then we'd go home.
Right.
And then we wouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm.
And we would hear, we had some very stalwart friends on the Hill, but they weren't in a position to drive this debate.
Right.
Remember, by '95, Newt Gingrich had become Speaker of the House. Bill Clinton, as president, was ambivalent
Yeah.
on bankruptcy
He was
issues.
no supporter of our position.
And the problem was most of the senators didn't understand it. Senator Metzenbaum by then was a supporter.
Oh,
but
yeah, yeah.
there were many liberal senators that this was in the weeds to them. They wouldn't understand it. So we had a meeting. We had our annual conference that spring of '98 in Miami, Florida, at the Fontainebleau. And we had Congressman Jerry Nadler gave the keynote address. And Jerry Nadler had quickly become one of our champions on the House Judiciary
Because
Committee.
he had, in February of '98, so the credit card industry introduced their bill in, I think, September of '97. In February of '98, Nadler introduced his version, which
had many of the proposals that we advocated. We worked with his
Yeah.
staff to develop those.
now obviously it didn't go anywhere, but
But as a counter.
yeah,
And he came there, and we realized we were going to get killed if we didn't have somebody. The previous winter, I had gotten a cold call from a lobbyist with a firm in Washington that happened to be the Patton Boggs firm. And he introduced himself. It was a nice guy. I don't remember the name. He says, I just want to let you know this bankrupt stuff's really heating up. He says, every other firm on K Street has signed on. Now, if you're interested in representation, we can give you. And I said, well, what would it cost? He says, well, if you really want to go whole hog, it's going to be $100 and some thousand. If you want us to do the middle version, it's $50. If you want us to show up at some hearings, it's $25. I said,
we
don't
didn't have
any of that."
25.
But it drove the point home to
Yeah.
us that we're really
Yeah.
behind the eight ball,
Yeah,
and this thing is moving, and it didn't matter what
Yeah.
the facts were.
yeah.
Right.
So at our convention in the Fontainebleau, we said we had a lot of people there, probably. I'm trying to think if we had 350 members there, roughly.
Gosh, I think it's more
Well,
than
that was
Really?
Yeah. It was about 350 members, and we decided we got to make a money pitch.
Yeah.
So we just started the convention and said, this is where we're at. And it's worth noting that most of the people that joined NACBA in the early years, they were heavily focused on the legislature. That was the drawing card. We had done some court cases too, but so they were all involved in what was going on and they cared about it. So we took to the floor and said, we're in trouble. We found out because we had a low turnout in Florida that we were going to lose close to $30,000 on the event. We were a group that finished our first year with $5,000 and felt like we hit a home run.
Yeah.
So we never had money.
Yeah.
So
We
here
always
we are,
spent whatever we had.
losing
because-
our shirt, not sure how we're going to make all of this work, needing to hire a lobbyist.
No, we didn't even think about that yet.
No, well, we talked about it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So we pitched our members. We said, we've got to raise money so we can